In the winter of 1922, a small Bavarian farm became the site of a crime so chilling that it has haunted Germany for a century. 6 people were brutally murdered, and no one knows who did it, or why. The evidence was puzzling. Strange footprints led to the house, yet disappeared without a trace. Doors were locked, meals were left uneaten, and yet someone was clearly living inside. Tonight, we unravel the story of Hinterkaifeck, the farm where terror lingered long after the snow melted. Hinterkaifeck was not just a farm, it was a home, a place where a family lived and worked, tending to livestock and surviving the harsh winters of early 20th century Germany. But beneath the snow and silence, something malevolent had taken root. For months prior to the murders, neighbors reported odd occurrences. Strange noises in the attic, footsteps in the snow leading to the house but never away from it, and lights flickering when no one should have been there. The family spoke of feeling watched, of shadows moving at night, and yet, when authorities finally discovered the scene, the horror they found surpassed even their darkest imaginings. The Gruber family, who owned Hinterkaifeck, were ordinary people living a modest life. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, was a hard-working man. His wife, Kazilia, managed the household. Living with them were their widowed daughter, Victoria, her 2 children, and the elderly grandmother. Their lives were simple, isolated, and routine. But in that isolation lay a vulnerability. The aftermath of World War I left Germany in turmoil. Economic hardship, social unrest, and a sense of disillusionment pervaded rural communities. Hinterkaifeck was a tiny world detached from the chaos, yet that detachment may have contributed to the horror that unfolded. Andreas Gruber's farm had been struggling. Reports suggest he had been owed debts and that there were rumors of disputes with neighbors. Yet nothing could foreshadow the grim fate awaiting him and his family, a fate that would perplex police and historians alike for 100 years. On the morning of March 31st, 1922, neighbors noticed that no one had emerged from Hinterkaifeck. Days earlier, Andreas had gone into town but had not returned. The neighbors assumed he was delayed by work. Eventually, the farm was visited, and the grisly scene revealed. 6 members of the Gruber family had been slaughtered with a mattock, their faces and bodies bearing no sign of struggle. The house had been locked from the inside, yet footprints in the snow indicated someone had entered and lingered, unnoticed. Whoever committed this atrocity had vanished without leaving a trace, a ghost haunting the snowy Bavarian woods. Neighbors recalled hearing strange noises in the days leading up to the murders, creaking floorboards, unexplained thuds, and the unsettling sound of footsteps in the snow outside. Victoria's maid reportedly mentioned seeing shadows moving near the attic and doors opening by themselves. Even more unsettling, letters and notes from the family hinted at a growing sense of dread, as if they knew something was coming. Authorities would later describe the case as without precedent in German criminal history. What could drive a person to commit such horrific acts? Psychologists suggest the murderer may have been familiar with the family and the terrain, acting with premeditation. The choice of a mattock, an agricultural tool, suggests both brutality and practicality. Equally disturbing is the evidence of stalking, footprints leading to the house, evidence that the killer lingered, possibly watching the family for days. Such behavior aligns with the profile of a calculated, methodical killer, yet the motives remain opaque: revenge, jealousy, or sheer malevolence. Over the decades, the Hinterkaifeck case has spawned numerous theories. Some suggest a neighbor, long rumored to hold grudges, carried out the murders. Others point to a drifter or mentally unstable outsider. Fringe theories propose more bizarre scenarios. Secret societies, ritualistic killings, or even supernatural involvement, fueled by the family's repeated sightings of shadows and unexplained noises. Each theory is tantalizing yet inconclusive, leaving the case suspended in an uncomfortable limbo of speculation. Perhaps the most haunting detail is that someone or something remained at the farm after the murders. Items had been moved, fires were lit, and livestock was fed, all suggesting that the killer lingered among the victims. The psychological terror this implies is staggering. The family may have been aware of a presence, sensing it daily, helpless against the unknown. Such behavior blurs the line between a crime of passion and calculated, methodical horror. Modern criminologists examine Hinterkaifeck as a case study in premeditation and psychological terror. Dr. Hans Weber, a German forensic historian, notes, "The level of planning is evident. The murderer knew the family, knew the terrain, and knew how to leave almost no trace. It is not simply a murder. It is a haunting, a terror executed over time." Even after decades of investigation, the case remains unsolved, with each new examination raising further questions rather than answers. The Hinterkaifeck murders remind us that evil can strike silently, that human cruelty can leave no trace, and that the unknown often weighs heavier than the known. In isolation, even the familiar can become threatening. In desolation, ordinary tools can become instruments of terror. The snow may melt, the forest may regrow, but the memory of Hinterkaifeck lingers, a chilling testament to the fragility of human life and the enduring power of mystery. Another question continues to disturb historians and criminologists alike. Why did the killer stay? After the murders, someone clearly continued to live on the farm for several days. The animals were fed, fresh bread was eaten, smoke rose from the chimney. Neighbors even reported seeing someone moving near the property days after the estimated time of death. This detail changes the entire psychology of the crime. This was not a frenzied killer fleeing the scene in panic. This was someone calm enough to remain inside a house filled with bodies. Someone who felt comfortable there. Another unresolved puzzle involves the footprints in the snow. Witnesses reported seeing a set of tracks leading from the forest toward the house shortly before the murders. Investigators followed them carefully, but there was a problem. There were no footprints leaving the property. The trail simply ended at the farm, which means one of two things must be true. Either the killer remained hidden somewhere on the property for days before the murders, or someone already inside the farm was responsible. And then there is perhaps the most unsettling question of all. Several members of the family had reported strange noises in the attic in the weeks before the murders. Footsteps, dragging sounds. Something or someone moving above them. When police later searched the attic, they discovered signs that someone had recently been sleeping there. Pieces of straw arranged like bedding, food scraps, and disturbed dust. If true, it would mean the killer may have been living above the family for days, possibly weeks, watching them without their knowledge. Even today, researchers continue to revisit the case using modern techniques. Digital reconstructions of the farm have been created. genealogical investigations have attempted to track descendants of potential suspects. Historians have analyzed police archives for overlooked clues, and yet, despite all of these efforts, the identity of the killer remains hidden somewhere in the fog of history. Like the snow that once covered the farm, the truth seems to have melted away, leaving only questions behind. The story of the Hinterkaifeck murders is disturbing not only because of the brutality involved, but because of what it reveals about the nature of fear itself. This was not a crime committed in the chaos of a crowded city. It happened in isolation, in silence, in a place where the victims believed they were safe. The farm was small. The family knew every field, every tree, every path through the forest. And yet the danger did not come from the outside world. It emerged quietly, from the darkness of the woods, or perhaps from within their own walls. There is something deeply unsettling about crimes that remain unsolved. Human beings instinctively search for explanations. We want motives, we want names, we want closure. But some events resist explanation. They sit quietly in the past like shadows that cannot be illuminated. The Hinterkaifeck murders are one of those shadows. Over the decades, suspects have been proposed, theories debated, and countless investigators have attempted to piece together what happened on that cold Bavarian farm. Yet every explanation leaves something unanswered, a detail that does not fit, a timeline that collapses under scrutiny, a witness account that contradicts everything else. The deeper we look into the case, the more uncertain the truth becomes. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the story is the realization that the killer was almost certainly someone ordinary. Not a monster from legend, not a supernatural force, just a human being capable of unimaginable violence. Someone who walked through the same forests, spoke the same language, and lived in the same quiet rural world as the victims. And yet something inside that person, something dark and incomprehensible, led them to commit an act of brutality that would echo through history. Today, the original farm no longer exists. It was demolished shortly after the murders. The fields where the Gruber family once lived are quiet now. The barn is gone. The house is gone. But the story remains. Somewhere in the forests of Bavaria, the echoes of that night still linger, hidden in old police records, whispered through generations, and carried by the cold winter wind. And perhaps, the most unsettling truth of all, is that the person responsible for the Hinterkaifeck murders may have lived out the rest of their life peacefully, unpunished, unidentified, their secret buried alongside the victims, beneath the silent snow. If you enjoy dark mysteries and forbidden history, subscribe to the Black Archive.